Hi everybody, it's Liz Danoon here from Get Into Neurodiversity, and I, along with Gillian Zocker, are very excited about Dyslexia Awareness Month, which is October. It's red. Today is cold, windy and rainy outside, so I am instead in my daughter's studio. She has a film studio as well, and I'm wearing my very funky red dressing gown. I am warm, I am cozy, and I'm happy. So there you go. Today, red dressing gown. Why not, I figure. Today's topic is very much, again, about those signs and symptoms of a student or a child who might be having some difficulty learning at school. But today we're looking at secondary school. So we've already done preschool and we've done primary school, which was yesterday. So go back and look at those Facebook Lives if that is you. And today we are doing secondary school. So let's get right into it. As we know, dyslexia is a combination of abilities as well as difficulties. So we are talking about that spiky profile. We're talking about people who have really high level abilities in some area, but they invariably struggle with reading, writing, spelling, and quite a few other things, which I'm going to run you through today. My list is from the British Dyslexia Association today because it's nice and succinct and pretty much to the point. When we talk about that spiky profile, which is what we did yesterday, we're talking about that high range of ability in certain areas, which often comes out in somebody's skills profile, but it can also come out on some diagnostic testing too, and that's what they refer to, that spiky profile. So dyslexic learners, despite certain areas of difficulty, may be orally very able and very knowledgeable. They might be creative, artistic or sporting, but there's also going to be that list of things that they find really difficult. And we know that dyslexia can be diagnosed through a diagnostic assessment, but really we always start with looking and observing a student or a child who's having difficulty to see which sort of areas they're having difficulty in. And it's that tends to indicate whether we need to go ahead and get some testing done for them. But you know what? It's a great to be totally aware. So with written work for secondary students now, they may have a poor standard of written work compared with their oral ability. So the time it takes them to write 3 or 4 sentences in their workbooks, they could have actually told you the whole story or potentially even told you the whole answer to a question. So their oral skills will be far superior to their written language skills. They can have poor handwriting with badly formed letters or neat handwriting but super slow. My middle son used to be so neat, but he would be writing so slow because he was actually pressing his pen so hard on the page to get his neatness maintained throughout his writing, and his poor little hand used to ache and his wrist used to hurt. And when I said to him one day, you know what, your writing is beautiful, but why don't you just loosen your pencil up and just flow a bit more? And it went from being super neat to being super messy. I sometimes actually think that students with spelling issues, which may mean they're included in the dyslexia profile, will often write so messily that you can't tell whether they're spelling correctly or not. Definitely something to think about. They can have difficulty setting their work out. It can be messy, particularly those projects that you know have to be set out beautifully. They can spell the same word differently in one piece of work. They can confuse upper and lowercase letters, sometimes using capital B's where they're not meant to be, and lowercase letters where they're not meant to be. They can write a great deal but totally lose the thread. In other words, there's no rhyme or reason to what they've actually written. They're just going through the paces, really. They can have difficulty taking notes in their lessons, which is why it can be really helpful if you've actually got a friend who can note take for them, or a system of PowerPoints that you can actually print out and give out to students, or you can record lessons orally. Hi Rosie, hi Joe, lovely to have you watching along with me today. They can also have difficulty organising their homework, their class tasks. They can find tasks difficult to get done within a certain time frame, and they can appear to know more about any topic because they're really good listeners than they can actually commit to paper when it's needed. With reading, they can be hesitant and laboured, especially when they're being asked to read out loud. And that's something I would always ask their permission before I got them to stand up in class and read out loud, or to potentially an audience. They can omit, repeat, or add extra words. They can read at a reasonable rate quite often, but not actually know what they're reading about. They have no comprehension. I've actually seen this a number of times when I used to run reading groups, where the child would just power through what they were reading, but you'd get to the end and ask them a question and they would have absolutely no idea what they just read. They were just regurgitating the word forms, but it wasn't actually connecting in their brain. They can fail to recognise familiar words when they're reading them multiple times. They can miss a line of their textbook or repeat the same line twice and sometimes not even realise. They can lose their place in their books and easily use their fingers or another way to guide them. Reading rulers are really helpful for children who have this issue, and it can be a visual processing issue that causes them to lose their place, as well as an eye tracking issue. They can have difficulty pinpointing the main idea of a passage, and I did say yesterday it's a great idea to have a highlighter on hand, or for teachers to underline areas that they really want children to focus on, or students to focus on, to make sure they actually understand the main thread of a piece of work. They can have difficulty using dictionaries, directories, and also encyclopedias. We don't really use encyclopedias so much more now, but we definitely do online. But you can use the search function online, which is so helpful. Dictionaries, not a fan of dictionaries for children with dyslexia, unless they're phonetic dictionaries, of course, and yes, they do exist. You can get a phonetic dictionary. Why not just ask Siri how to spell a word, or teach them some spelling skills as well. Let's get into numeracy now, so the maths area. They can have difficulty remembering their tables and all their basic number facts. They can find sequencing problematic. I certainly did when I had a task that had multiple steps in it. In Year 11 maths, I virtually gave up. I could not keep up with the steps, and I didn't know which step I was up to and what I was supposed to do at the step half the time. They can confuse the signs, such as the multiplication sign for the plus sign. And many other signs can be confused as well. And what does that cause? It causes them to make mistakes. And what does that do? It causes them massive stress. It is signal, sign and grapheme confusion, which can happen with the alphabet as well. They can think at a high level in mathematics, but they might need a calculator for those simple calculations like their timetables, which doesn't really make sense. But I want to tell you about top-down learning. This is not covered here, but top-down learning is those students who you can throw this incredibly difficult maths problem at them, but they will actually tell you the answer and you'll go, whoa, how did they get that answer? And you'd say to them, how did you get that answer, Ben? And Ben would say, well, I don't know, I just know what the answer is. So he can't tell you how he did it, but he knows what the answer is and he's correct. It's called top-down learning. It's really interesting. Do some Googling on top-down learning. It's fascinating. They may be a child who misreads the question in the maths and misunderstands the words. Of course, that means that the next 20 minutes they spend on that equation is going to be wrong because they actually misread the question in the first place. Incredibly frustrating. Happened to all three of my children multiple times where they just misinterpreted a word. They can find mental arithmetic at speed incredibly difficult, like tables races and things like that, or mental maths quizzes where they've got to get onto it. They can find memorising formulas difficult. So you can understand how there'd be overflow into areas of chemistry and physics and science areas as well for those children who have trouble memorising formulas that they then have to regurgitate for a test or exam. It's not so difficult if the formula's on hand and they can just grab it out. It's more like your open book type tests and exams. Other areas, they can confuse direction left and right. We talked a bit about that yesterday. They can have difficulty learning foreign languages. I am not a fan of making a child who struggles with the English language learn a foreign language. It puts them under enormous pressure, and I don't think it's necessarily needed. In some countries around the world, it is so normal for children to be able to speak 2, 3, 4, and up to even 5 languages, particularly in Europe. But it does create enormous difficulty when it comes to the reading, writing, and spelling of the language. Often the oral part of the language is one of the easiest aspects for a child with dyslexia to get. They can learn to speak a language orally very easily, just not with the reading, writing and spelling of it. They can have indeterminate hand preferences. In other words, they can be a bit ambidextrous. They're not sure which hand they are. They can play tennis with both hands or cricket with both hands or, so there's lots of those things that you can look out for. They can have difficulty processing information at speed, making exams and tests that are timed incredibly stressful for them. They can misunderstand complicated questions that are multi-structured. The same goes for the teacher who has that waffle tendency and they waffle too much and the student just gets lost in the waffle and actually doesn't understand what they're meant to be doing. Quite common, particularly at that high school level. They can find holding a list of instructions in their head difficult, but if you ask them to perform that task and give the instructions as they go, they can do it really well. It's just actually holding the information in their long-term memory in order to be able to produce a weak piece of work that can be difficult. Behaviour is always one that we need to focus on in high schools. It can be organisation and behavioural issues around those areas, like they're losing their sports equipment, they don't know what lesson they're meant to be in, they get lost on the timetable, they misinterpreted the timetable, they misinterpreted the email that said they need to bring something to class that day, they can miss appointments, they can be immature and or clumsy, as can children with lots of different learning difficulties, but it is a trait to look out for in the dyslexia profile as well. They can have difficulty relating to others, and again, it's this inability to read body language, and it's something that is also an overlap with the autism spectrum area, and there is definitely an overlap between autism and dyslexia, so something to consider as well. They'll often be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they may be excessively tired due to the amount of concentration that is required just to get through their schoolwork. So next steps is always to get a support team around the child who's struggling. We need to look after their social and emotional health. Most importantly, it's number one. Make sure you speak to school counsellors, learning support teachers, SENCOs, parents, foster parents if your child's one that's been fostered and cared for by other people outside of their family. Grandparents are quite often doing a lot of the parenting these days. We need to get that support network around that child as quickly as possible. Have a look at what's going on for them and look at ways in which we can support them. I will talk about diagnostic tests later on in this series. I hope you are having a fantastic day and I look forward to speaking with you again. I've got this lovely filter on today, as you can see, which means I don't have to wear much makeup. I like that. I've got my cozy dressing gown on because it's red for Dyslexia Awareness Month and it's super warm and it's a really horrible day here in Melbourne today. So I hope you have a super day, everybody, and I will see you next time. Happy Dyslexia Awareness Month.